The music in today's episode of the Black Man and Robin Irregular Game Show was brought to you by Jarrus. You can check out more of his work at ccmixter.org/people/VJ_memes. Not too long ago, I was describing my work as a game journalist to somebody not completely familiar with my job. I said that it was kind of a new thing, the sort of work that emerged around the late 20th and early 21st century. With the advent of the internet and the accessibility of all sorts of tools that allow you to reach a wide audience very quickly, game journalism really has taken off in the 21st century. Indeed, game criticism, when compared to film criticism or literary criticism, is very new. At least, it is for video games. Game journalism, however, has been around for a lot longer than I had initially been thinking. In fact, the famous poet and journalist Edgar Allan Poe engaged in some game journalism in his day. You see, it was after that conversation that I remembered an old article that I read about the Turk, written by Edgar Allan Poe himself. In case you've not heard of the Turk, you should know that it was, supposedly, an incredibly advanced chess-playing machine constructed by Wolfgang von Kempelen in 1770. The Turk, in reality, was a wonderfully sophisticated fraud that involved some Wizard of Oz-style hijinks. The story of how the Turk came into being is pretty fascinating. Kempelen, you see, began work on the machine after seeing the illusions of François Pelletier at the court of Maria Theresa in Austria, and he decided that he'd have to beat Pelletier at the illusion game by creating a game of his own. What Kempelen came up with was the automaton chess player. It was a large device that consisted of a mechanical man, the eponymous Turk, who was controlled by a real man who hid beneath the table. There were candles underneath the table, so the man underneath could see what was going on thanks to a matrix of magnets underneath all the chess pieces. However it was that Kempelen managed to convince a chess master to hide beneath the table and assist him in a fraud is a subject for another video. That said, the Turk was not a marvel of 18th century programming and very early computing, rather it was just a very clever fraud. Or perhaps, as Kempelen would have preferred, an illusion. While Maelzel's chess player was a phony, it didn't mark the end of chess-playing machines. Indeed, it was a couple of centuries after the fraud that IBM created a real chess-playing computer, Deep Blue. While Deep Blue wasn't the first computer to play chess, it was one of the most famous, in large part because it managed to beat chess grandmaster Garry Kasparov. Years later, IBM's Watson would go on to beat Jeopardy grandmaster Ken Jennings. In 1805, Johann Nepomuk Maelzel purchased the Turk and made some modifications, including a voice box that allowed it to say check, and the machine and its operators continued to make the rounds on exhibition throughout Europe and eventually the United States, playing against and often beating a number of people, including Benjamin Franklin and Napoleon Bonaparte. While today there exists a replica of the Turk, unfortunately the original machine was lost in a fire. However, not before Edgar Allan Poe had the opportunity to write about it. Edgar Allan Poe wrote an essay called Maelzel's Chess Player, in which he describes the Turk and the way it was presented, as well as his ideas on how the automaton may have been fake. It's a rather in-depth piece. Poe drew on a deep well of his knowledge regarding automatons, games, and perhaps a bit of human nature in order to put together an interesting article on the Turk. You see, were the Turk real, it would have been amazing. It would have been a truly remarkable advance technologically, a sophisticated artificial intelligence. Regrettably, 'twas a scam and nothing more. Edgar Allan Poe saw right through it. Besides the fact that this essay is an interesting little bit of history, Poe's article is also a fascinating piece of very early game journalism. If you're one of the ruffians who refers to video games as electronic games, then perhaps you're willing to make a bit of a concession and expand your horizons to include automaton games. That would mean that my job of a game journalist has a sort of precedent that goes well beyond the brief history of the enthusiast magazines of the 70s and 80s, but has roots that reach through history and down to one of my favorite writers of all time. While Poe is best known for his creepy stories and sad poetry, as well as being a leading figure in the history of Gothic fiction, he was also a game journalist, at least in part. This isn't a massive revelation, but it's an interesting bit of history. It's nice to look back and realize that the work I do today, these discussions of game mechanics, how games affect people, and their relevance in society, is part of something bigger, older, and involved in the history of all the arts. What do you think about this? Is there a deeper, more complex precedent for game journalism, or does modern video game journalism exist in a vacuum all its own? You can contact us on the official Black Man and Robin Twitter, or you can contact me at Jordan_Cameron on Twitter, and shoot us your thoughts. If you say something particularly neat, we just might surprise you with a Steam key and feature you on the next episode of Game News Updates.